Martha was 65 years old when she finally spoke her truth, not with a dramatic declaration, but in the quiet of her own heart. After decades of giving, of sacrificing, of putting others before herself, she came to a quiet realization. She had been missing from her own life. She had no pension, no retirement savings, no partner to lean on. Most painful of all, she no longer had a place in her son's world, the very person for whom she had given everything. To passers-by, Martha was nearly invisible. Just another older woman walking slowly down the sidewalk, living alone in a modest rented apartment near downtown. Quiet, unassuming, overlooked. But if they had looked closer, they might have seen the truth. She carried the weight of a lifetime in her bones. She had endured more than many ever would, raising a child on her own, bearing a husband far too soon, working job after job that demanded everything and gave little in return. For many years, Martha believed what the world had subtly taught her, that a woman's worth fades with age, that usefulness determines value. She believed that once her hands were no longer needed, her voice no longer mattered. She equated love with labor, and when the labor ended, she feared the love had too. But healing, like a dormant garden in winter, can bloom again with time and care. Martha's life became a second spring. Slowly, she began tending to herself the way she had once tended to others. She found comfort in small rituals, watering a plant, buying herself fresh flowers, walking in the early morning light. She learned that starting over wasn't a sign of failure. It was a sign of life. Like a tree struck by lightning that sprouts again from the roots, Martha discovered a strength not in what she had lost, but in what remained. This isn't a story of loss. It's a story of reclamation, of choosing herself not because there was no one else, but because she finally knew she was enough. And if you too have felt forgotten, pushed aside, or left behind, know this: you are not alone. Your life isn't over. Sometimes the most beautiful chapters begin after the world has stopped watching. Number 1, the loss when everything fell apart. Martha had always believed that old age would come with peace. She imagined evenings on the porch with her husband Tom, watching the sky turn pink over the hills of Kentucky. She imagined Sunday dinners with her son, and maybe one day grandchildren laughing in the yard. That was the picture she had painted for herself, a quiet, simple life full of love. But life, as she would come to learn, doesn't always follow the plans we hold so tightly in our hearts. The day Tom died was cold. The sky had turned a dull gray by mid-morning, and a mist settled over the fields. Tom left the house before sunrise, just like he always did. He kissed her forehead, poured his coffee into a thermos, and said, "Don't wait up, hun." She never did, but that day she would have given anything to have waited. The call came around noon. A foreman with a heavy voice told her there had been an accident. A scaffolding collapsed. Tom was gone before the ambulance arrived. There was nothing anyone could have done. At first, she didn't cry. Her hands trembled, but her eyes stayed dry. She hung up the phone and walked back to the kitchen, where a pot of beef stew had been left bubbling on the stove. She turned off the burner, sat at the table, and stared at the floor for what must have been hours. The funeral was a blur. People spoke. Hands touched her shoulder. Castles filled the counter. But Martha felt like she was floating above it all, watching someone else's life fall apart. A week later, the man from the construction company came to her door. He didn't make eye contact when he handed her a check. He said the company didn't carry proper insurance. He said they were barely staying afloat. He said $40,000 was the best they could offer. "If you want to fight it in court, that's your right," he said, not unkindly, but with a tone that made it clear it wouldn't help. "But the money won't be there. It's this or nothing." Martha looked at the check. Her hands were dry and cracked from years of working the land, but they trembled like a leaf as she held that slip of paper. $40,000. It felt like a slap. It felt like blood money. Still, she took it. She folded the check and placed it in the back of the drawer where she kept Tom's wallet, his reading glasses, and the watch he had worn every day for 20 years. She didn't tell anyone, not even Jacob. She couldn't bear to say the words aloud that her husband's life had been reduced to a payout smaller than some people's new cars. Without Tom's income, things got tight. The house wasn't expensive, but bills added up quickly. Heating oil, groceries, property taxes. She stopped buying meat. She stretched every dollar. She picked up mending jobs for neighbors, patched clothes and sold eggs from the coop. Jacob, still in high school, tried to help in his own way. He offered to skip college and get a job right away, but Martha wouldn't hear of it. "Your daddy wanted better for you," she told him. "You'll get there." But deep down, she was afraid. Not just of the bills, not just of being alone, but of fading away quietly with no one left to carry her story. Number 2, the sacrifice, giving it all to the ones we love. Jacob was always ambitious, even when he didn't quite know what to do with it. After graduation, his test scores weren't good enough for college scholarships, and they couldn't afford tuition on their own. He was restless, full of energy and dreams, and determined to get out of their small town. "I want to go to Chicago," he told her one morning over toast. "There's work out there, mechanic jobs. I can make real money, Mom." Martha's heart sank, but she nodded. She didn't want to hold him back. He was 18, full of fire, and believed in a better future. How could she be the one to say no? Before he left, she gave him $1,000 in cash, money she had saved over months by cutting every corner she could. "Just in case of emergency," she told him, "don't touch it unless you really need to." Jacob hugged her tight, kissed her cheek, and promised to call every Sunday. At first he did. He called every week, just like he said. He told her about the city, how fast everything moved, how loud it was, how different it felt from home. He said he was working at a repair shop, starting with oil changes and tire rotations, but that the manager liked him. Then one Sunday, the tone of the call changed. He sounded nervous, hesitant. "Mom," he said, "can I ask you something?" He explained that rent was expensive, $1,000 per month just for a studio apartment. "That's $12,000 a year just disappearing," he said. "It's like I'm throwing money away." Then came the request. "If I had a little help, I could buy something, a small place. I found a unit that's just the right size and the bank will give me a loan, but I need help with the down payment." "I was thinking maybe the money from Dad." Martha felt her chest tighten. That money had sat untouched for nearly 2 years. She thought of it as sacred, Tom's final gift, a safety net for emergencies, her backup plan if everything else fell apart. Still, Jacob's voice was soft, full of hope. "It's for us, Mom. For you too. One day I'll bring you to the city. We'll live in the apartment together when I make enough. You won't have to worry anymore." She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. So she said yes. The next day she went to the bank, transferred all $40,000 to her son's account. Jacob bought the apartment. It was small and unfinished, but it was his. He sent her a photo. Bare walls, a mattress on the floor, a single window with the city skyline in the distance. Martha printed it out and pinned it to the wall above her sewing machine. She looked at it every day. She started working harder, planted more in the garden, took on more sewing repairs, raised 2 pigs instead of 1, sold everything she could during the holidays, and mailed him the earnings. When Jacob came home that first Christmas, she handed him $500 in cash. "For paint or furniture," she said. He smiled and took it, but didn't say much else. She never asked for anything in return. She didn't need to. The joy she saw in his eyes, however fleeting, was enough. Or so she told herself. What she didn't know then, what she couldn't have known, was that this would be the beginning of a slow unraveling. One where promises faded into silence. One where love would be taken for granted. And one where Martha would have to find the strength to build a life again. Not through her son, but through herself. Number 3, the invisible mother. Forgotten, but still here. Time has a way of thinning even the thickest bonds when effort is no longer mutual. For Martha, the distance between her and Jacob had grown quietly like dust in the corners of a once lived-in room. At first, the calls came once a week, then once every 2. Eventually, they became unpredictable, sporadic, rushed, and often initiated by her rather than him. Martha never said anything about it. She told herself Jacob was busy adjusting to life in the city, maybe even overwhelmed by work or bills. But she felt it, the silence, the space, the slow unraveling of connection. Still, she sent him small care packages, batches of cookies, wool socks, letters folded with $10 bills tucked inside. She added little notes with each one. Stay warm or don't forget to eat or love you always. Jacob rarely responded, but she clung to the idea that he appreciated them, that somewhere inside he still felt her love, even if he didn't say it out loud. Then came the wedding, not through a phone call, not through Jacob, but through a neighbor. One crisp autumn morning, as Martha was bringing in her laundry from the line, her neighbor Connie came over with a bright envelope in hand. "I think this was delivered to me by mistake," she said with a small smile. "Congratulations." Martha stared at the envelope. Her hands felt suddenly heavy. Inside was an invitation, elegant script, thick paper, a gold border. Jacob was getting married. The wedding was in 2 weeks. In Chicago, she read it again and again. The words didn't change, but her heart did. First disbelief, then confusion, then something harder. Grief. He hadn't called, hadn't told her, not even a mention. For 3 days, she said nothing to anyone. She folded the invitation and placed it next to the photo of Jacob she kept on her nightstand. At night, she stared at it and wondered, was I not meant to know? Or did he simply forget that I might want to be there? On the 4th day, she made up her mind. She packed her best dress, a navy blue one with a modest neckline and lace trim she'd worn to church weddings over the years. She booked a bus ticket to Chicago. 12 hours, 2 transfers. She didn't care. She would go. She would show up. The chapel was beautiful, modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows and white roses lining the aisle. Everything looked expensive, tastefully arranged. The guests were dressed in tailored suits and pastel dresses, their smiles fixed and practiced. Martha found her name on a place card near the back of the hall. Her seat was in the last row next to the door. She sat quietly, folding her hands in her lap. No one greeted her. No one asked who she was, not even Jacob. When the music swelled and he walked down the aisle, he never looked in her direction, not once. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away. She didn't want to cause a scene. She didn't want pity. She just wanted for a moment to feel like his mother again. But she didn't. During the reception, she lingered along the wall, watching from a distance. She saw her son dancing with his bride, laughing with her family, toasting with champagne. Martha tried to catch his eye. She raised her hand once half-heartedly. He never looked over. No one asked her to join for photos. No one asked her to stand beside the bride and groom. It was as if she wasn't there at all. She left before dessert was served. That night, in the small motel room near the Greyhound station, Martha sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The silence in the room was thick. She whispered into the darkness, not expecting an answer. "I don't think he saw me." Number 4, the betrayal. Used, ignored, discarded. After the wedding, things became even quieter. Jacob didn't call. Weeks turned to months. The packages Martha sent were no longer acknowledged. She left voicemails that went unanswered, sent birthday cards without reply. She told herself he was busy starting his new life, adjusting to marriage. But deep down, she knew she was no longer part of the picture. Then one afternoon, she found out the most painful news of all, not from her son, but from a neighbor down the road. "Jacob's a father now, isn't he?" Connie asked casually. "Someone mentioned his wife just had a baby girl." Martha felt the wind knocked out of her chest. She hadn't known. There had been no phone call, no text, not even a photo. A granddaughter, her first grandchild, and she hadn't even been told. Hands trembling, she picked up the phone and dialed Jacob's number. It rang 4 times before someone answered. It wasn't him. It was her daughter-in-law. "Oh," she said flatly, "it's you." Martha tried to keep her voice steady. "I just heard about the baby." "I didn't know." The reply was sharp. "Well, we've been busy. Jacob has a lot going on. We didn't have time to update everyone." "I would have helped," Martha said softly. "I could have. I don't know, just been there." There was silence. Then the voice on the line shifted tone. "If you really want to help, you can come take care of the baby. We're both working. We need someone during the week." Martha blinked. "I'm not sure I can. I mean, my back isn't what it used to be. I have trouble lifting." The voice cut in. "If you're too old to help, Maybe you shouldn't expect anything from us. You want Jacob to take care of you? Then you need to be useful. Those words struck deeper than any silence ever had. Martha stood in the middle of her kitchen holding the phone like it was burning her hand. Her knuckles turned white. She said nothing more. She hung up, and for a long time she didn't move. The late afternoon light poured through the window, falling in golden strips across the floor. Outside, birds chirped like any other day. But inside her, something was shifting. Something fundamental. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was clarity. For the first time, she saw things exactly as they were. She had given everything. Her money, her time, her heart, all of it without question. And now she was nothing but a burden. Something to be used when needed, forgotten when not. She sat at the table, the one Tom had built decades ago, and stared out at the empty yard. And there, in the quiet, she made a decision. She would not beg. She would not wait for a phone call that might never come. She had spent a lifetime putting others first. Now, finally, it was time to choose herself. Number 5, the turning point. The day she chose herself. For days after the call with her daughter-in-law, Martha barely spoke to anyone. She didn't cry. She didn't pace the floor. She didn't shout. She simply stopped. She stopped waiting for the phone to ring. She stopped planning packages she might never send. She stopped checking the mailbox for letters that wouldn't arrive. Instead, she started looking around the house, not at what was in it, but what was missing. Tom was gone. Jacob was gone. The laughter, the warmth, the dinners, the holidays, the quiet joy of a life shared. They were gone too. The house had grown heavy with silence. Every creaking floorboard and ticking clock echoed louder than words. She would wake early out of habit, but stay in bed because there was no reason to get up. She would walk past the pantry stocked with jars she had canned for someone who never came home. She would sweep the same spot on the porch out of reflex, even though no one ever walked those steps anymore. Then one morning, something changed. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't arrive like a revelation from the heavens. It came in the form of an ache in her hip as she bent to feed the hens. A simple, familiar pain, but one that whispered a question. If not now, when? She stood up slowly, looked across the yard to the faded barn, and whispered into the morning air, "What am I still waiting for?" No answer came, but she already knew it. Nothing. No one. That afternoon, she opened a clean notepad and began to write. She listed what she owned, what she could sell, what she needed. She called a realtor. She made an appointment at the bank. She searched online for small apartments in nearby towns, places with sidewalks, grocery stores, public libraries, people. It wasn't about running away. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even about loneliness. It was about something deeper, something she hadn't allowed herself to name in decades: self-respect. She had always told herself that being a mother meant sacrificing, enduring, giving without expecting anything back. And maybe in many ways that was true. But now she was more than just someone's mother. She was still a woman, a whole person, and that person deserved peace. So she sold the farmhouse. She sorted through boxes of old memories, choosing what to keep and what to let go. She wrapped Tom's photo in a soft towel and packed it carefully. She donated clothes, furniture, even the good china she'd been saving for holidays that never came. Then, with everything she owned packed into the back of a borrowed pickup truck, she left. She did not leave bitter. She left free. Number 6, the rebirth, finding peace on her own terms. Martha's new apartment wasn't much by most standards. A modest one-bedroom unit tucked into a red brick building just beyond the city's edge. The walls were paper-thin, the radiators clicked and groaned in the winter, and the kitchen, with its aged linoleum and stubborn cupboard doors, could barely hold 2 people at once. But what it lacked in modernity, it made up for in warmth. Literal warmth, yes. The sunlight streamed in each morning through the east-facing windows and bathed the chipped countertops in gold. But also a deeper kind of warmth, the kind that says, "You're safe now." It was the first space that belonged to her alone. No one's voice echoed down the hallway. No footsteps stormed in at midnight. No accusations lingered in the silence. The quiet here was clean. It didn't ache. It didn't accuse. It comforted. Her neighbors were mostly older, retired couples, widows who smiled and clutched cloth bags full of groceries, a man with a cane who still made it out to tend the flowers around the building's perimeter. They were gentle people. They held doors open. They said hello. They didn't pry. Martha appreciated that. She wasn't ready to tell her story, not all of it, not yet. She found a job cleaning at a nearby church just a few blocks away. It was humble work, done in the earliest hours before the faithful arrived. There were no time cards, no performance reviews, no spreadsheets, just floors that needed mopping, pews that needed dusting, and a silence that allowed her to hear her own breath again. She kept a small transistor radio in her coat pocket, playing oldies that made her hum under her breath and sway as she swept. Sometimes, when no one was looking, she lit a few candles. Not for prayer, not in any formal sense. More like a ritual, a small offering to the quietness she was cultivating. At the end of her shift, she'd often sit in the back pew, not to plead or confess, but simply to be. For the first time in years, being was enough. Her life settled into a soft, manageable rhythm. Tuesdays were for grocery shopping, always the same store, always with a list folded neatly in her pocket. Thursdays were laundry days. Sunday afternoons were reserved for letters. Letters she wrote to herself. Sometimes they were reflections, sometimes affirmations, sometimes ramblings full of questions and half memories. But they were hers. She no longer sent anything to Jacob. No more money orders, no more carefully assembled care packages, no more voicemails she never got replies to. At first, that felt like a betrayal, but eventually that silence transformed. It stopped being a void and became a boundary, a quiet declaration of self-respect. She had done her part. She had given until she was hollow. Now it was her time to fill herself back up. The little apartment began to reflect that shift. She planted herbs in mismatched pots and lined them along the windowsill. Basil, mint, rosemary, each one thriving under her care. She hung a wind chime on her door, its delicate song greeting her each time she returned home. On Fridays, she bought herself a small bouquet from the corner store. Never extravagant, just a handful of daisies or carnations wrapped in brown paper. She no longer waited for anyone else to think she deserved beauty. She gave it to herself. Sometimes when she saw mothers walking hand in hand with their children, she felt a pang. Love doesn't vanish. Real love, especially a mother's, embeds itself into the bones. But that love no longer ruled her. She didn't chase after it. She didn't need it to validate her existence. She had survived. She had rebuilt. She was healing. One evening, sitting with a cup of chamomile tea, her fingers curled around the warm ceramic, she looked out through her thin curtains at the street below. The street lights flickered on, painting the pavement in soft orange. A breeze stirred the chime, and there it was. Peace. Not the kind that is given, not the kind that waits for someone else's approval, but the peace that comes when you realize you can care for yourself. The kind that whispers, "You're still here," and that's enough. She had no pension, no retirement plan, no family dinners waiting for her. But she had herself, her steady hands, her sharp mind, her stubborn, quiet dignity. And in that, she had all she needed. Martha's story isn't unique. It's not loud. It's not headline-worthy. But that's what makes it powerful. Too many women, after lifetimes spent caring for others, husbands, children, parents, find themselves discarded when the world no longer sees their utility. They are left with questions no one taught them to answer. Who am I without them? What now? Martha chose to answer in the only way she could. She chose herself. If you're reading this, maybe with a quiet house around you and a cup of tea in your hand, hear this. You are not invisible. You are not broken. You are not a burden. You are a woman with a lifetime of stories, with wisdom carved into your soul, with strength that's survived countless storms. And it is never, never too late to begin again.